Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this latest edition of Minutes of the Week. Cases of cyber crimes, cases of corporate frauds have surged like anything. And today, on this special edition of Minutes of the Week, we will talk just that. And to talk on that subject, I have with me Arpinder Singh, India and Global Markets Leader, Forensic and Integrity Services, EY. Arpinderji, thank you for talking to us and taking out time, and I welcome you on the Minutes of the Week. When we say forensic and integrity, what does that exactly mean in the context of corporate?
So it actually means in the old traditional days, it meant fraud investigations. So for instance, whenever a company got a whistleblower complaint, you had to investigate it, get a third party potentially to look at a matter, show objectivity. So in the old days, fraud investigation was primarily a reactive service of doing investigations. And now, of course, it's pivoted to doing more proactive work where, you have big boards, you have the Companies Act. Now, everyone wants to also make sure you can be more proactive, catch frauds before they actually happen. So now there's a lot more technology, there's a lot more adoption of principles to make sure your company has a robust governance system to protect it from fraud rather than just only finding the fraud. So things have changed a bit, but it's a combination of both reactive and proactive right now.
India primarily has been a slow adopter of technology and especially security related to technology. What are the kind of corporate frauds related to governance you find in the corporate sector today? Some of which are very common and have surged in the last 5 years.
I would say, if I can just take the last 2 years, for instance, because COVID has been such a pivot for everybody in the corporate world. I would say the biggest surge has been cyber issues, cyber incidents. I mean, I never did so many, my team has never done so many cyber investigations that they've done today. At any point in time, we are doing 5 or 6 cyber investigations. I have always read about ransomware till 2 years back, to be honest. But we've all now had to deal with ransomware attacks on some of our clients, where there's actually, threats to collect money in Bitcoins. I never thought...
And what is the scale of such crimes, Arpinder? Like when I talk about the we talk about the volume of the money.
Money is huge. It goes into millions and millions of dollars being asked as ransom, which is, so, as you said, Sherlock Holmes. So the reality is today, hackers are actually asking for ransoms, and they actually tell you, I'm going to release this information publicly if you don't give me X amount of money, or I will not unfreeze your systems. What is ransomware? Basically, they freeze your systems. You cannot do business unless you pay that money. Or they share confidential information and say that we're going to share this information which will get you into trouble. You have both aspects happening. So I find these cyber incidents are really what has taken off. I would say I have seen an increase of cyber cases by about at least 5 times compared to what it was pre-COVID to post during the COVID period. I wouldn't say post-COVID because it hasn't gone over. But I would say it's really, that's a big area. Second thing I see is people taking advantage of fintech action. So everything has become easier, right? I mean, now you don't have to sign contracts in person. You can get electronic signatures, digital signatures. You don't need to send a remittance payment to a bank and say, have 5 people sign and say, can I make this remittance to a third party? Today it happens all electronically, on email or through platforms, etc., etc. So it has led to a huge ease of doing business. It has been fantastic. But the con is, I think governance and compliances have not kept pace with technology. As a result, there's a whole gap which some people have taken full advantage of in the last 2 years. So I see a lot of cases where money has been siphoned out of companies, where people have taken advantage of the fact that they have pivoted very quickly to technology without the right controls. And that has shown in the fact that sometimes even senior management or middle management have taken advantage and taken money out. And during this COVID period where controls were lesser, people who had less oversight, there was so much personal grievance happening. So I've seen a lot of theft of money by employees during this time, which I hadn't seen before COVID. Before COVID, obviously, we saw a lot of cases where vendors were taking money from companies, charging companies, employees having conflict of interest. But now the second case of having money leave because of weak controls, especially during the fintech being adopted without right controls, is another.
But do you believe that the corporate sector is aware? Is there a substantial amount of awareness when it comes to these kind of corporate frauds and the kind of indulgence you're talking about? that requires serious attention. So, do you think that there is enough corporate awareness, for that matter, regarding these kind of crimes?
I would say it is increasing, Abhinav. So obviously, a lot of companies have been hammered. I mean, we recently did a fraud survey where it said 33% of the people polled in India actually said they've had significant fraud in the last year or two. So that means people are realizing that they've had fraud incidents, and people who have had fraud incidents, Abhinav, generally do learn from them. Obviously, if you don't learn from them, then you have a different governance issue in that sense. But most companies do learn and put in the right governance framework. So I think they're learning. I think the struggle happens for mid-sized companies and companies which are growing very fast, like startups, which you hear about nowadays. Because those companies have grown very fast, very quickly. Maybe they have not had all the funds at the right time to build in the right governance framework. But I think they're catching up. But they're a little behind some of the more mature companies which we have been used to dealing with, which have better frameworks to deal with fraud. But you're right. I think dealing with fraud is becoming more and more relevant now. I mean, think about it. I had 35 people in 2011, and today I have 1,400 people doing fraud investigation. So obviously, people have come to appreciate the fact that they do have a fraud issue. They do need to deal with it. If you went back 10 years back to 2010, Abhinav, most clients used to tell me, "Are you talking rubbish? I have no fraud. We have zero whistleblower cases and we have zero fraud." And that is not possible, right? There is no company where
As more and more reports surface of frauds happening, like I remember State Bank of India, Air India for that matter, Zomato for that matter, there have been huge corporate frauds and leakage of data. I think with that, of course, you're absolutely right. There will be more awareness coming forward. But when it comes to awareness, Arpinder, there is an ecosystem which works around it, and government plays a very important role. We are still stuck in the personal data protection bill, is still stuck in the parliament. And when I say PDP bill, it considers millions and billions of citizens of India, the commoners, who are used to giving their email IDs, phone numbers away for the free coffee. In a country like that, where mass awareness is very small, do you think PDP bill would see the light of the day in the coming few quarters?
I actually am an optimist on that, Abhinav. I do feel in the next 2 quarters, it will see the light of day. I think the Joint Parliament Committee has put their findings in front of Parliament, and I think there should be something which should come out in the next 2 quarters. At least all of us in the governance world are looking forward to it. Obviously, as you know, most large companies in India, Abhinav, already have to comply with some data privacy laws because they either have operations outside India, or they have global customers, or they have global employees working for them. So if you have any one of these three, you anyway have to comply with things like GDPR or some US statutes on data privacy. So a lot of the large and mid-sized companies which are growing have already had to pivot their systems a little bit. Or if you have a joint venture with a global company, or if you have private equity money, data privacy is something you have to deal with. Of course, you're absolutely right. Once the whole data privacy bill is passed in Parliament and comes in, I think the education part is extremely critical. We all as citizens need to be educated. I mean, I went to a mall last week where the person asked me for a phone number, and actually till I gave the phone number, he refused to give me the discount. I won't give you the name of, and it's a big global company in a mall, right? Obviously, the person behind the counter said, "I won't give it to you unless you give me all your personal information." I had to actually walk away because he or she refused to even take my order at all till I gave all my personal information. So you're absolutely right. All of us are not aware of our rights. In the Western world, actually, people are very aware of their rights. They immediately say, "No, I don't want to share my number with you." And they have the right to do that. So you're right. Education has to be critical. But I think the great work the government has done around Aadhaar and the way they created this whole Arogya Setu app, I'm sure they'll do something cool around data privacy.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your greedy optimism, but yeah, moving forward, when we talk about the young startups which you mentioned, Arpinder, a majority of the companies in this country, when you talk to them about online exposure, it's confined to having a website. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, to awareness reach till that level, when we talk about the big corporates, the publicly listed companies, the companies having huge access to funds, of course, there is a systematic order in place. They have got people like you to remind them of maintaining a proper structure when it comes to security. How long do you think this would take? This awareness would take to reach the grassroots of the corporate circle? and the youngest of the companies operating in this country.
I
And
think
I'm not talking about the common people. I'm talking about the young companies which are coming up, especially from tier 2, tier 3 towns.
I have a feeling it'll take time. I mean, Abhinav, I think the statute also gives a 2-year time period to comply fully with the regulation. So I think once it goes into action, I mean, my recollection of the statute is that it gives you a period of time. Even the global GDPR gave a year or year and a half to period for people to comply. It's not easy to comply. Even for by the way, for big companies also, it's not easy to comply. So I think the smaller companies will definitely take a lot of time in complying with this, and it will take them if it's 2 years, I would say at least 3-4 years before it fully disseminates into the smaller organizations. Obviously, the larger and mid-sized organizations will have to first pivot, but it will take
3 to 4 years. What are the next changes you see in the fintech space, like in terms of technology and security safeguarding?
I think the biggest things I'm seeing right now will be in the fintech space is more usage of cryptocurrency. I don't see that, and obviously regulations keep changing. There's some bad news, good news. Some countries ban it, then bring it back. So there's some confusion around it. But I think cryptocurrency is something which is the future. I see a lot of it. A lot of companies talking about it as potential alternate investments. People are talking about NFTs. Recently, I was at a client and they were showing me some cool pictures and art work which they were using as NFTs, and I was asking them from a governance perspective that how do you price it? It's like a movie, right? What is the right price for an NFT? I mean, my issue was more governance. I put every question into a governance question, and I found it very cool that a lot of companies are actually creating NFT assets, and they have invested in cryptocurrencies, Bitcoins. People like you and me have invested in Bitcoins, by the way. And I think that's the way of the future. A lot of the ransomware attacks, by the way, the hacker was asking for Bitcoins, by the way, at least some of the ones I saw. And then if you look at even Bitcoins, I work in the whole area of bribery and corruption. Believe it or not, today I cannot trace a fraudster because fraudsters are now being paid through Bitcoins. So I don't have cash. I can't take a bank statement and say, okay, I see money go from Mr. A to Mr. B. Or I don't even have a picture about cash being handled. It's all through Bitcoins. So it has actually made life more difficult for an investigator like me. But the good part is everything is tracked in the system. The second cool thing I find is the cash in the tier 2 cities, cash in the last mile. If you remember, Abhinav, the biggest issue we had when we went to an old world company was that I have to pay my employees in cash in this tier 3 city because there's no banking. The really cool thing now is I can go to a company and say they should have zero cash because of this fintech. So that's a big change in the way business is done, at least in the area of governance where the usage of cash has really come down. And third area I would say is doing trainings. For instance, I never did trainings earlier. I'm giving a simple example from a governance because you raised trainings. Everything is now done through e-learnings. Now, if you have a question in a company around ethics or compliance or a policy, they have bots. So you actually call up and there's a bot on the other side and you ask your question and the question is answered by a bot. That never happened in the past. So you have bots now in technology, you have fintech, no cash usage. You have alternate investments. I think one other thing is this whole neo-banking thing, which I hear about, where you don't need a branch. You can do banking, everything can be done virtually. And I think that is going to become more and more. I've heard about Paytm Bank and other.
It's going to become more and more prominent in the fintech space. Thank you so much for speaking to Business World. Ladies and gentlemen, this is all for today. We'll see you soon on the next episode.